Hello, everybody. And so you've had a lot of interesting speakers, it sounds like, through this class. I'm sure that I'm going to be pretty different from what you've heard before. I've looked at your lineup of speakers, and architecture is a pretty different profession than the ones that you've heard so far. And I know that you're taking this class because you would like to explore different career paths. And so today I've prepared kind of a two-part presentation. And the first part is really about my path, my early discovery of how or when I decided or was influenced to become an architect. And then from there, my education, how that went. I'm going to go into some of my travels, and I'm going to go into the firms that I worked for, and everything before I got to the position that I'm in now. I've been in this career for over 30 years. And as I was introduced, I'm currently the president of a large firm in Salt Lake City called MHTN Architects. We have 75 employees. And today where I'm sitting is very different than the path that I took to get here. And I think it's really important for any career to understand that path that you take. And even, I'm just going to warn you right now, it was a completely different era when I was going through my education. And in the Q&A, we can talk about, you can ask me some questions about the differences about what students go through it today. But I'll just start. So I'm going to start with, I'm like everybody else. I have family. I didn't come from architects. Sometimes people say, oh, did you choose your career because your dad or your mom or your family members were? And I'm going to tell you, no, I didn't. These old photos up here are my heritage and background. On the left is Farron, Utah, Scandinavian Mormon immigrant converts. And on the right is my great-great-grandfather was the town marshal at Park City. He was an Irish Catholic silver miner, and that's my dad's family on the couch right there. So just a little bit of background about myself. These are my parents growing up in the 50s. That's how these were my media role models in my era. Okay, I don't know if anybody recognizes these two shows. Who does? Brady Bunch and yes. And why did I put Mary Tyler Moore up there? Would you guess? Exactly. She was probably the only female representation of a woman with a significant career. Happened to be in journalism, but nonetheless, I was really young when we were watching these shows up through the ranks. And in hindsight, I didn't realize it at the time, of course, but in hindsight, looking back, I think this just is, I'd like to note that pay attention to your culture, what's going on today, and who's influencing you, and what you're really listening to in those messages. I guess what I took away from Mary Tyler Moore was that this is the Golden Dome that you see in the photo right there. And this is the library where I really spent a lot of time, and that's why it's exaggerated. This is where I lived in my dorm. That also has a plaque in it. This was a first year of studies building, classroom building, spent a lot of time there. And this is the architecture building. Up there are two lakes. So that was my interpretation of the plan of the campus. When the third year of studies in that 5-year program, and this is fairly, I was going to say common, but it's occasionally you'll find a program, and most programs have semesters abroad. There are a few architecture programs in the country that actually spend either an entire semester or an entire year, either in Rome, Italy, or Florence, Italy, and now they're starting to have programs in China and London. But Rome is really the mother of classical architecture as far as the city is concerned. And even though it's classical architecture, the Renaissance, medieval times, etc., all the way back, its lessons are foundational to architecture and architectural design through the centuries and even through modernism. And so the third year of studies was spent in Rome, and some of my most transformational or inspirational people, and that were met in that year. That really was a deep dive into the influences or the knowledge I have today and how I apply that to design. And this is a medieval plan. It's called the Nolan Plan of Rome. And you'll notice something unique about it. And what architects do is we communicate through drawings. And even back in, I think this is in the 1700s, we are looking at a map, and you can see that all the streets are white, and all of the buildings are black, except for what? Do you see anything else that's not, that's different than just the black mass? What's that? Plazas. What else? Arts. What's this?
Church.
That's a church. What kind of a building is a church besides religious? Public, exactly. So all of this is a way of looking at a city that all the spaces that you and I can walk into are white. And all of the spaces that are private or privately owned are what you can't walk into, or black. So even a map, maps today are interpretive, but back then, I mean, this was really a way of conveying space, kind of occupied space. Part of a really important aspect of architecture is understanding how to perceive the world. Now, I know that's true with any career, but our perceptions of our environment are really important because we see them in a way that is not just columns and rooms, but a way how we experience space. So this is part of my note-taking and sketching is really, really important part of my development and any architect's development, and not just typing away or drawing electronically, even today. And this quote is, "Many people may witness the same environment or event, but no two of them will have the same experience. Some people, including designers, go through their lives deriving little experience from what they have seen. Their attention to their environment remains at one level." What's that saying? What that is saying is there are good designers and there are not so good designers. And good designers are really spending time paying attention to their environments and learning from that so they can give back through their work. I'm going to talk about a few of my professors and influences through college, which will also give you some insight to what architecture has been and what it's now becoming. This man, this is a photo from, I think, in the 20s or 30s, and actually 30s. And he is Frank Montana, who founded the Rome program at Notre Dame. He was one of my professors. And he also was a Beaux-Arts Perixx Prize winner. And this is how they used to learn architecture, was really painting and drawing in the streets and observing their environment. We did a lot of that in Rome, and this is these next few slides are my notebook from Rome, so it's a lot of visual and written notes. And the visuals are cutting and pasting from the handouts that I was given in class, and also little drawings that I'm noting. For example, in this one, okay, so there's some columns, and there's scale figures in the columns, and the point that we're observing in this is that really the negative space in between the columns looks like the shape of a sarcophagus, and that is, there are multiple readings you can get from architecture instead of just a flat. Oh, it's a Doric style. Oh, it's a classic style. This is how that kind of design influences modern interpretation as well. Here's some more analyses. Sketching, interpreting is really a big part of architecture, not just drawing and reporting. This is one of my professors, Jeffrey Blanchard, who still teaches in Rome today, and we would spend our mornings walking through the city. He would give us a lesson, we'd walk through the city, and basically live the lesson. And I think that that is important in probably anything that you do, not just architecture, but when you take a lesson, go see what it's about, actually walk it, if you can, and experience it. There's nothing better than that. This is another one of our design professors, Judy DeMaio. She's currently dean at the New Jersey Institute of Design, and she has did these analyses of different piazzas and spaces as we were walking through the cities that we were touring, and then coming up with new designs. So all of these analyses would inform the designs that we ended up doing in our studio classes. And one of the most animated descriptions that Judy would describe to all of her classes was about the piazza in Venice. And the Piazza San Marco, she would describe as like a game board with pieces set on the game board. So I just literally sort of took that idea and sketched it out. There's some more. This is another influence of architecture that Colin Rowe was a professor at Cornell University, and he wrote a lot. He was a theoretician and an academic, and he wrote a lot about urban space. So architects think not only about the buildings they're designing, individual buildings, but how the context is that we influence and how our architecture is influenced by the context that we build in. There are writers and theorists that in the field of architecture today that write a lot of things that are still very influential. I'm going to go through a few of the projects now that we designed during that time in Rome. This was a monastery. This was a student center that was very historically inspired. I'm sorry, that's a library, not a student center. This is a student center. And then during that time in Rome, another really important experience for any architect would be to engage in a competition sort of format. So we do that as architects today. We compete for work. And way back when we were in Rome, there was a fellow at the American Academy in Rome. His name was Fred Fox. And he invited a few of us to work on his entry competition to the Venice Biennale. So we came and we worked with him in one of these, I think it was this studio. There was a single room inside this really big, well, small building. And we helped him put that presentation together. But what was really important was that, I think what I'm telling you is that architecture, like any career, requires mentors. And you'll find mentors in your professors and in people who invite you to participate with what they're doing. So kind of like an internship. This I would describe as like a mini internship, like a week, 2 weeks, where we were really working intensely to put this competition together. And we learned a lot. I learned a lot about strategy of presentation, the ideas you actually put into the visual, and the ideas you don't need to talk about to convey, to communicate what you're trying to say. I'm going to quickly go through sketchbooks. Sketch, sketch, sketch. And even today, if you're considering being an architect, sketching is really important, and I'll tell you why. It's because this, observing your environment, gets into your brain a lot differently than a keyboard to screen relationship does. It's completely different and still very important. After I received my degree, I went back to Rome for a couple of, and tried to work with some architects. So when you get your degree in architecture, and it really doesn't matter if you get a 5-year professional degree like I did, or a 4-year degree, then a 2- or 3-year master's program like is offered, what's next for you, or even during that time, would be trying to get apprenticeships. And even if there are summer internships or whatever, and I think that's pretty common these days with most professions. In our profession, I happened to go back to Italy and tried to work with this Mark Massimiliano Fuxas, and this is a project that he and his partner Maria Saccone did in Milan. That's the kind of work he was doing at the time. And then I moved to Baltimore. This is watercolor out my window in Baltimore. When I got to Baltimore, I worked for RTKL Associates. And you might wonder, why am I traveling around so much? Do all architects have to go to different cities? And the answer is no. But I was very curious, and since I grew up here in Salt Lake City, Utah, I wanted to explore different cultures and understand different places. So when I was offered a job at RTKL, I worked on this project in Reston, Virginia for a new downtown with several buildings, and that's me at my drawing table. And these are a relic of antiquity right now, these drawing boards. But maybe you all have, do you guys see these here at the community college drawing boards? Does anybody see that? No. I don't see anybody saying yes. I didn't think so. I met my husband in Baltimore. He's a chef. And then while I also was working for RTKL, this was a study we did for, or I did for a high-rise that was actually being built in downtown Baltimore. That firm is an international firm. Its headquarters is in Baltimore, and they have architects, engineers, graphic designers, and I'm forgetting you, but let's just say a lot of engineers as well as architects. Over 300 employees at that firm. When I was there, my sister, that's me on the right and my sister on the left, I did a competition for the Perixx Prize fellowship, and I was awarded that, and then my sister a few years later was awarded one of them as well. And that Perixx Prize was the same prize that the 1933 professor that I showed you painting also received. And there he is. I forgot that slide I had mine. And some of the sketches that I did on that fellowship. And this was actually after I had worked. So what I did was apply for that fellowship while I was doing working for 2 years at RTKL. I took a break for the fellowship and then came back to working. These are letters that I won't worry with, but I was writing back to my fellowship people the experiences I was having during that time. And then I mentioned I met my husband in Baltimore. So we married, and then we decided to move to San Francisco. And I worked for Fong and Chan Architects in San Francisco. They are a firm who did, and there I am there. They did the Young Museum in San Francisco, if anybody has been there. And they did it as in partnership with a Swiss firm, a Swiss architecture firm. We often, as architects, we work in teams. And this might be a good time to talk about that. It might appear, or sometimes the reputation of like the Mike Brady Bunch reputation is that one person draws everything, and you're the architect, you're the author, and it's your project. And actually nothing could be further from the truth. We work in teams. The client is part of the team. The client's influences are significant because we are a service industry. We serve that client rather, but we have to bring these big ideas, right? So the balance is, how do we bring really great ideas to the client and help them understand, one, how great they are, or two, why they would work for them. Or maybe go through an exploration where we discover it really wouldn't work for them. And then the team who puts it together is several people. And a project like this, I mentioned there's a firm coming from Switzerland, combining with a firm that is local in San Francisco. The firm from Switzerland came up with the big ideas, and the details of how to do it. And the firm in San Francisco was stamping the drawings to make sure it met code, that it is going to perform, that all the warranties are going to be there, and that the design intent is carried out. Because if, as designers, we're just executing, we don't understand what the big idea was we're trying to execute, then it really won't turn out very well. Then I, for a short period, went to Boston. At that time, the economy was very poor. And there's two places in the United States that have the most architects per capita, Boston and San Francisco. When I got to Boston, I could not find work anywhere. And they have, I can't remember, 5 probably major schools that offer architecture degrees, and they're flooding the market with architects. So what I did was I worked on commission and did watercolors. There you go in terms of making a case for doing all those watercolors in Rome. I had a skill now that I could actually market when I didn't have a job. Then I came back to Salt Lake. So here we are back in Salt Lake. I began to work for a small firm called EDA Architects. Some of you might know them. And was able to design the Antelope Island Visitor Center. And I don't know if any of you have been out there. Yes. And that has design influences from the rocky ridge that it sits on. And it was published in Architectural Record in 1999, which is actually significant. This is a national magazine, and it got recognition for its design from that periodical in different places. So that's the first, that's my background, almost, I'd say. Fast forward to today. I mentioned I was president of MHTN Architects. I joined MHTN 15 years ago, and then in 2010, about 8 years ago, more or less, I was promoted to president of the firm. I started there as a team project architect and project designer, and was able to work on a lot of higher education projects, a lot of student centers, and able to develop my career that way with the mentors at that firm. Some of the projects that I've personally worked on at MHTN are, some you might recognize some of them. The University of Utah Business School. The one in the middle on the top is ZAG, which is ZAG headquarters. You know, the ZAG is the electronic company in Pennsylvania, and you know their products. Well, we designed their interior headquarters here in Salt Lake. This is the Viridian Library of West Jordan. That's in the Salt Lake County Library headquarters. And on the lower right is Primary Children's Lobby. That's a new entry in lobby. In the middle on the bottom is the University of Utah School of Dentistry. And then on the lower right, actually I did not do this project. This is MHTN work. So I didn't personally, I was not personally on this team, but that's at Mount Jordan Middle School, which has also won several awards. And here they all are. This is something we're working on right now. My team is working on University of Utah South Campus housing and dining. It'll house almost 1,000 beds for freshmen and have 650 seat dining hall. It's not really a dining hall. It's a really nice dining environment is what it's. This is a lobby rendering. So an example of what we do today, as opposed to drawing, this is produced in a few different softwares. We work in BIM modeling. Does anybody know what BIM stands for? No, Building Information Modeling. One of the softwares we work in, the primary software we work in, is called Revit. Revit is a 3D live model that houses everything that you're putting in the building, including hardware and everything. And then we export that to another modeling software, and then we add people and things that the views were taken and stylize it according to our own styles. So the artistic component comes in sort of the finishing of how we're putting these images out there. And this is another rendering style and another space that we're going to be opening in the fall at the U. Carolyn Kemp Gardner Commons. It's a 5-story, multiple primary classroom building that has also a cafe and dining component on the main level, and that's the shot that we're getting there. So student environments is a lot of what I'm designing today. This is also this is an example of an idea we was giving to a client for the medical school at the University of Utah. This is an actual shot of the Shepherd Union of Weber State University. Again, we've done a lot of student unions, and this was a renovation. So it's not a completely new building. It is taking existing, actually it was 2 existing buildings, and we closed this space you're seeing right here in between. It used to be an outside walkway, and we transformed it into an indoor environmental skylights. Architecture also takes, in our firm anyway, and this is true for a lot of firms that do a lot of different practice areas, it takes us out of our state. So this one was done at North Carolina State University. It's a very large student center, and we had 3 architects on that team. This portion of the building here was existing previously. We reclad the outside. This piece here is completely new. And there are other new components that we're not seeing on the other side. So it's about 320,000 square feet of space. This is a rendering of the main gathering space at every university campus life center. It's another student center. We had fun with the ceiling on this one. These are wood slat ceilings that have that were mimicking a trellis. It's actually outside. This next space here is a breezeway with a trellis over it, so we're trying to make the trellis feel like it is coming from the outside to the inside. You might recognize this rendering. The building, this is the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office that just opened downtown. That was part of what we did there. This was their little partner building out in West Jordan for the same client. And then here's a very different project. So the variety of types of people that we're designing for is really an integral part of architecture. This is the Volunteer America Youth Resource Center for homeless youth. And this is the dining area next to the courtyard. Our challenge there was to really design a space for homeless youth that would feel welcoming to them and non-threatening and non-institutional. Although they have a lot of institutional needs, a lot of security needs, a lot of safety needs. But we worked very closely with the client, and part of our process was actually to involve some of the homeless youth that the board had been working with, who were able to work with us, and they gave us some great perspectives, great insight on how to design what they felt would be appropriate for a space that they knew that they could be welcome in. That's the West Jordan Library, the shop I gave you earlier. And this was is an event center and library combined, and their corporate offices. So it was a really exciting project for us. A lot of different environments that we had to take into account. So the question was, how do you deal with the engineering aspect of it? How do you integrate it into engineering into the architecture as a team?
Or is it just completely separate?
Or is it separate? So it's yes and yes. So we collaborate with separate engineers, separate structural, and the most basic structural engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, civil engineer. And then there are other specialties that come into play. Sometimes there's a lighting designer or a theater consultant, some specialists that we need technical input. Hospitals have a lot of specialists. And so what we do is through, I mentioned building information modeling and the Revit software, the 3D software, that is where all disciplines can come into the model and work on the same, in the same model at the same time. So when the structural engineer, for example, they'll be designing the structural frame, and they'll move a grid or move a column or put a brace frame. All of a sudden it'll appear right through the middle of the room we're working on and just say, wait a minute, you know, and then we'll have a conversation with them and we'll say, you know, they'll explain to us why they need that in that location. We might go through some alternatives, and one or the other is going to shift what we're doing. But that's very different from when it used to be. We would have to go and all draw separately, print a set of drawings, come to a meeting, and figure out all the conflicts at the table. But now we don't have to do that today. Okay, so the question is, we're working together with a lot of people. It sounds chaotic. How do we come together with resolve a lot of ideas where everyone thinks they're coming to the table with the best idea, the best solution? That's actually the fun part. The fun part is a little chaotic, but it really forces collaboration. Otherwise, I think it'd be pretty boring to sit there in isolation and just draw what you want all day. It might sound fun. That's a good pastime, but it really doesn't get you anyplace. So it forces conversations, and that also forces kind of a structure of communication. So we'll have a project manager on a team that facilitates the communication from the client to the team. So that project manager is telling the team, hey, these are the priorities for the client. And then he or she's also coordinating the engineers and identifying where we have to, and staying on schedule at the same time. Now, if we come together with a lot of ideas on the table, there's usually a time for that. We usually say, okay, this week we're going to brainstorm, or what we call a charrette. This space, the big idea for the first part of the building, whatever the idea, whatever the point in time is that we have to solve, we like to come and invite all ideas to the table so that we can prioritize them. The most experienced people on the teams are the best judges of who is going to, or which ideas get lifted to the top and which ones get pursued, and then everyone agrees to move forward in that direction. So that's how we kind of manage the chaos. If that makes sense. Yes.
Have you ever been to Pompeii?
Yes, I have. The question was, have I ever been to Pompeii? And yes, I have been to Pompeii. Why do you ask?
Because the architecture there is insane.
Have you been to Pompeii?
Yeah.
What did you think of the architecture there?
I thought it was crazy that they knew to do all that a long time ago.
Oh, with the courtyard. So she's
With everything.
So she's saying you thought it was crazy that they knew how to do that such a long time ago. Yeah, past civilizations. It's amazing how sophisticated past civilizations were, and what we can learn from them. And actually, that's archaeology is another fascination of mine, and I think that's why. Yeah. Both. That's a great question. I touched on that a little bit about competitions. We interview for most of our work. Clients do come to us, but the private clients come to us. And now even the private clients will have kind of a selection process where they might ask for a proposal from 3D architects or something like that. And price is part of it, but I think it's a common misconception that architects get work on bidding work. And we do propose fees, but we are not usually selected solely on the fee. We're usually selected as part of all of our qualifications. And some of the things our clients look for are, how many of that type of building have we done? Do we know what is important to them? Have we researched the client's background? How technically savvy are we? Do we have the right engineers on the team that will solve their particular issues? We might, for example, if I go and propose to a client that has a really bad site for soils conditions, I may not be proposing the right thing. That's a technical example. And they might, if they're wise, they won't select me because I don't have the right engineer, or I don't understand that those conditions are part of the site. It's a fine balance. We're not always selected on the fact that we do really beautiful buildings. That's always a part of it, but it's not the whole picture. So we interview a lot, but there are also the cases where we just get direct award work, where because of our reputation, a client will come and request us to do work. We have to interview for most of it though. We have, but it really has to be a very, very busy economy to do that, or that we just don't have the right experience, and they come to us and say, I don't know an example, let's see, oh, we have this condo project that we want to do. And our firm in particular has decided that we do not want to do condos. And the reason we don't want to do condos has to do with liability. So we would turn down that client. So those two cases, so maybe we're making a choice of either we really don't practice in that area or putting ourselves at risk, or our workload is maybe too high. But we don't turn down work very often because we know that when the economy cycles back down again, and that's inevitable, the construction industry just goes with it. And so we really just try to hire so that we can accommodate with our staff all of the demand that's out there. I kind of alluded to that context earlier. So the question was, can I speak to my experience as a female executive in a male-dominated field? And yeah, I definitely chose a profession. Construction and architecture are closely tied. They're very much two male-dominated industries. Today, architecture is very proactive about getting female students to stay in school in the engineering and architecture-related fields. So we're seeing a lot more women come into our profession, which is very encouraging. But during my time, I frankly had to acquire social skills that were much more male-oriented. It really had to do with communication style. Not being taken seriously as a female was definitely something that I faced. And how I met that was by, and this is just my way, and this is not necessarily to say that this is the way to do it, but my way was to ignore basically ignore the way that I was being treated and just get down to business. Because really what at the end of the day matters is what we're doing as architects, and not necessarily if I'm a female or a male or have purple hair or whatever. So I think that's the way that I think that key of respecting who you're sitting across the table from is probably timeless advice for anybody who is in a field that you feel like you're on the edges or the fringes of whatever that culture is of the field you're interested in. And that could be for any number of reasons. Your socioeconomic background, cultural background, racial background, gender background, whatever it is. If you're different from who you're sitting across the table from, I think the key in building a relationship is really to gain that trust in the people you're working with as people. And that, I think, is how, frankly, I think that was recognized, and probably how my colleagues in the firm I work for now felt that it was, that felt the confidence to vote me in as their partner and then as president of the firm. So that's how I would answer. Yeah, I guess that could be a perception. It's true that when you're president of any company, you tend to be the face of that company. So I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of speaking, but day-to-day wise, I'm on teams, and I know that people in my position, whether you're in any company, could choose one or the other. They could choose to sit back and let others do the work for them and just deal with the, I don't know, I guess the day-to-day stuff, which is actually really boring, frankly. It's boring but necessary to deal with business operations, taxes, lawyers, all that sort of stuff. and public image. But the projects I'm showing you today are teams I actually am on. And the brainstorm sessions that I talked about a minute ago are the key moments in a project that my presence is very active. When we're working out a problem that comes up in the field, for example, that one of the project managers doing the construction administration comes upon, I need to know that, because what's going to happen is that client and the president of that client's company is going to call me. And if I do not know what's going on the site or why it's going on, or I don't have an answer, that reflects poorly on my team and my whole company. So I have to be involved. And that's it's easy to say the top 3 or read a book about gaining trust that's written by a business person. And those are usually true. It has to do with it has to do with sincerity, all right? It can't be, and also it has to do with recognizing that don't feel shy about approaching a potential client. Like, if I don't know you and I would like to work on your project, I'd like you to give me your next really big project that you have for architects. I am going to get to know you first, and I'm going to ask you about what's important to you. And I'm going to wait till you ask me what's great about me. You all invited me here today to talk about me, but I have to say I don't give this presentation very often unless it's a student group in this particular situation. Yeah, I need to know what the other person has to say. And so it's a sincere relationship. It's not just a strategy. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.